This video is made possible thanks to our patrons and today's sponsor, ZocDoc. The year is 2014. Your outfits must include an item of teal clothing and orange clothing. Your Tumblr is full of Arctic monkeys and American Apparel. Alex from Target is on Ellen. You're putting the thing that does the killing between your teeth, but not giving it the power to do the killing. It's a metaphor, see? But most importantly for the culture, it's the peak of the YA dystopia craze. We were all worrying about what would happen when the world ended, yet comforted by the fact that Dylan O'Brien would be there to protect us.
Face no waist with a big old bed. Bad bitch, I could be your fantasy. I could tell you got beat.
The Hunger Games, Maze Runner, Uglies, Legend, The Giver, a little series called Divergent. Hollywood and publishing execs were tripping over themselves to push out the next big franchise. But not all dystopias are created equal. Some may be poignant and timely commentaries on social issues like the dangers of fascism. Others may be lightly redressed eugenics plots. My jeans are blue. Can you guess which one we're going to talk about today? For many, including myself before this video, the Divergent films are but a fuzzy memory, shelved amidst the YA media that you consumed as a teen. The only teen series I've revisited in my adulthood has been The Hunger Games, and I can confidently say that not only do those books stand the test of time, but they also surpassed my memory of them. So I was really riding a high, and I thought, why not give these other series a shot? Divergent? Yeah! What could go wrong? So it's at this point that it starts to become clear that this is a eugenics plot. A lot. The Divergent series is much worse than I remembered. And I don't know how much of it went over my head as a child because I was like kicking my feet and blushing at Theo James in the cinema. It turns out that Divergent didn't age badly. It is actually just bad. Normally I type out my scripts on my laptop. For some reason, for this video, I was like, I kind of want to write the script out by hand. That's not even all of it. So, strap in for a deep dive, critical analysis, literary dissection, film postmortem, franchise deconstruction of Divergent. Hi, I'm Ellen, and you're watching Illiteracy. You know what makes me Shailene Woodley scream? Making doctor's appointments. Which brings us to today's sponsor, ZocDoc. As you are probably aware, trying to find a doctor is a full-time job. It is. You search online, but half the listings are outdated, or the numbers don't work, or the websites are broken. That's where today's sponsor, ZocDoc, can really come in handy. ZocDoc is a free website where you can search and compare high-quality in-network doctors, choose the right one for your needs, and click to instantly book an appointment. From mental health to dentistry to eye care, skincare, everything in between, ZocDoc makes it easy to book in-network appointments with more than 100,000 healthcare providers. With ZocDoc, you can filter for doctors by insurance, by location, speciality. You can see reviews by verified patients, so you can choose the best and most convenient care for you. When you've found the doctor you need, you can see their actual appointment openings. You can choose a time that works for you and instantly book an appointment with just a few clicks. No awkward phone calls. Lord knows I hate talking on the phone. ZocDoc helps you get appointments fast, typically within 24 to 72 hours, and you can even get same-day appointments. As my mother always says, your health is your wealth. And getting care shouldn't feel like a full-time occupation. ZocDoc makes it simple, fast, and actually doable. So you can head to ZocDoc.com/illiteracy or click the link in the description to find a doctor who gets it and gives you the care that you deserve. Thank you, ZocDoc, for sponsoring this video. No media analysis is complete without some cultural context. So what was going on in the 2010s for the youths? We had Perks of Being a Wallflower. We had the star-crossed lovers, but one or both of them is terminally ill. We had superhero films. A lot of them. We had the vampire/supernatural romance. A lot of them. We had Boss Baby. Only one of them. And we had the YA dystopia. Again, a lot of them. The cinema, the TV catalog, the bookshop were all chock full of tales in which the world has ended / is ending, and a group of ragtag teens must save society from the evil adults. The dystopia craze followed the aforementioned vampire / supernatural romance. At this stage, franchises like Twilight and Harry Potter had been milked for all their worth, or so we thought. And Hollywood was on the hunt for the next big franchise. Enter The Hunger Games. The Hunger Games came out to enormous success, and publishing and studio execs had dollar signs in their eyes like cartoon tycoons. They threw their weight behind every copycat and lookalike, and the YA dystopia craze was born. As a reaction to the perceived weak, clumsy, passive damsel in distress a la Bella Swan, the new generation of I'm not like other girls were active, strong, witty, and ready to lead a revolution at the age of 16. Obviously, they still had the charming, sexy love interests, but they were independent and strong-willed. Since its release, Divergent has often been compared, sometimes favorably, mostly not, to The Hunger Games. Like so many who walked before me, I am also going to be at times comparing Divergent unfavorably to The Hunger Games. But this is not just a senseless takedown. This is a critical deconstruction of everything that does and does not work with Divergent. I am using that film and English degree. I also feel like people do like when I dissect bad books. I try to do my best to highlight the quality or lack thereof on different levels, such as the style, the storytelling, world building, and just, on a basic level how these things are constructed, whether they are written well, whether they are shot well, etc., etc. But whenever I make a video criticizing or hating on a piece of media, I'll get comments like, it's not that deep, it's for kids, or it's reality TV, or it's a fantasy series, blah, 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 blah. Maybe it is that deep. Have you thought about that? I also like overanalyzing media. It's literally my job. And I feel like if a teen series like The Hunger Games could stand up to this level of criticism and dissection and is just a teen series, why should we not expect that quality from all series? I think that assuming because something's made for young people, it's going to be bad or lower quality is 1, wrong, incorrecto, and 2, it's disrespectful to young people. Some of my favorite media of all time is targeted to children, and the storytelling is still excellent. So that's actually never an excuse. Also, this is a deep dive. Look at that timestamp. Is it over there or is it over here? I forget. Look at that timestamp. Divergent, the novel, first came out in 2011 and was written by Veronica Roth when she was only 23 years old at the time of publishing. This was Roth's first novel, and she wrote it while on Christmas break from college. And we will be able to tell from the quality of the writing that this was, 1, written by a very young person, and 2, written very quickly. Divergent became a huge bestseller and is one of the top 10 books of the 2010s. The 50 Shades books have the first 3 spots, but Divergent is not far behind The Fault in Our Stars. It was a big deal. And throughout this video, I have to discuss the events, aka the plot, and the world building of Divergent in the order of the books, which is not the most logical order. I'm giving you the information in the order that we receive the information, which does not make the most sense. But who told you that Divergent was supposed to make sense? The world building in the 3rd book brings up a lot of questions and makes it clear that Roth did not plan out the trilogy. And that is not a roast, that is something she has said herself in interviews, which is always a good sign. So in a way, it's actually quite beautiful and radical how this video mirrors the confusion and disorientation that is experiencing Divergent. Divergent is made up of 3 books and 3 films. It was actually supposed to be 4 films because they did that thing in the 2000s where they were like, let's split every last installment in a franchise into 2 parts, make more money. Unfortunately, did not work for Divergent, but more on that later. Something I want to point out about these films is that they star Shailene Woodley, Ansel Elgort, and Miles Teller. Divergent came out the same year as The Fault in Our Stars, in which Shailene Woodley and sexual predator Ansel Elgort played love interests. In Divergent, they're siblings. Also in Divergent, Shailene Woodley and Miles Teller are rivals. In The Spectacular Now, they're love interests. So Shailene Woodley has been love interest of both of these two male main characters. Kind of crazy. Anyways, she was working hard back then. So the books are Divergent, Insurgent, Allegiant. Miss Roth was loving the int endings. The int-ings, if you will. Thank you. And all these books revolve around a 16-year-old girl named Triss. And for, some extra ideas for Miss Roth in case she's looking for them, here's my pitch. Triss goes on a plane. Turbulent. Triss goes to the Met Gala. Elegant. Triss poops her pants. Incontinent. Also, heads up, we will be spending the most time in this video on the first book. And then we're going to kind of Speedy Gonzales through the plots of the second two because they're kind of boring and uneventful and repetitive. So it might be a bit front-loaded. Divergent takes place in a future Chicago after an unspecified war has ravaged the earth and destroyed all humanity. YA trope number 1, we're in a city, the world has ended, we don't really know why. We're just told that there was a bad war and Chicago is walled off from the rest of the world.
They say the war was terrible, that the rest of the world was destroyed.
The city is divided into 5 groups or factions, as they're known in this world, according to people's most dominant personality trait. The abnegation are selfless, the amity are peaceful, the candor are honest, the erudite are evil, smart, and the dauntless are brave. Abnegation, amity, candor, erudite, dauntless. It really feels like Ms. Roth was spending half her time on thesaurus.com. So this is our dystopia, and it fits pretty perfectly within the stereotypical YA dystopia that we know and love.
97 years ago, a nuclear apocalypse killed everything on Earth, leaving the planet simmering in radiation.
This is the future, and humanity is all but extinct.
The dystopian setting of 2010's YA was almost always a future America that has been decimated by a war, nuclear disaster, plagues, genetic engineering. That last one's a little hint for the future.
My jeans are blue.
So society has been restructured into groups, factions, districts, the haves and have-nots of some sort. Teenagers are almost always at the heart of some kind of social experiment or framework that allows the people in power or the dictator to control the population. YA authors really leaned into that natural adolescent instinct to rebel, view adults as the enemy, because most of the time every adult in a series is evil, and it's the teenagers who are left to lead society to a better future. Every teenager is a revolutionary, and somehow, despite being 15, they can see through these really thought out, orchestrated plans of these old dictators. Anyway, YA authors love to map tales of segregation onto a government that oppresses people because of arbitrary things like your attractiveness or your personality trait. I find a lot of these stories that champion change and revolution actually reproduce a lot of very stereotypical messages around gender, sexuality, race, disability, etc. The revolutionary message ends up feeling quite girl boss-esque, which is of its time. That's not true of all YA dystopias, but I find a lot of them just use kind of the imagery, the iconography, the aesthetics of dystopia for their setting without really engaging in any kind of social themes, which just kind of makes it boring. It makes it less effective. And the reason, again, I'm bringing all of this up is because I do not think that Divergent is an effective dystopia, so that's why we're laying this foundation, okay? Before we can paint the house, we gotta build the walls. Dystopias often function as cautionary tales, and that's when they work best, when the authors use the setting to highlight real-world power dynamics. Think of the quintessential examples like The Handmaid's Tale is about the stripping of women's rights, 1984 and the danger of dictatorship and censorship. The Hunger Games is about class disparity, dictatorships, and war. And Divergent is about being yourself, having more than one personality trait. I don't know. Does Divergent encourage much reflection on society? Put that thinking cap on for the rest of this video. There will be discussion points. There will be breakout rooms. Let's get ready. The irony of this series is that it's about being different, but it recycles all of the tropes of YA genre fiction. It feels like there's no true political critique or engagement. It just feels like, what if a BuzzFeed quiz dictated society? And after researching, I found out why this dystopia feels so half-baked, it's because Veronica Roth originally imagined it as a utopia. She says, "The world of Divergent is basically what I would come up with if someone asked me to create a utopia. A world in which everyone is focused on becoming good people. Sounds good to me. So I asked myself, what qualities would I pick if I were making this world? And I came up with the 5 factions. It was only as I wrote that I was able to see how my so-called utopia was actually a dystopia, because it forced people to become narrower, twisted versions of themselves, and they ripped each other apart. In Divergent, we follow Beatrice, or Triss, a 16-year-old from Abnegation, the selfless grey faction, as she makes a life-changing decision.
Am I smart? Kind? Am I honest? Selfless? Or brave?
When you turn 16, you must undergo an aptitude test that determines what faction you are and choose whether you want to stay with your original faction or choose a new one. And if you leave your faction, you never get to see your family again, for reasons which are unclear. Allegedly, it's really rare to get a faction that's not your birth faction, but genuinely, almost every single main character is a transfer. If you get the results saying that you fit more than one faction, you are divergent. And what do you think our protagonist Triss is? She's divergent. She fits into not 1, not 2, but 3 factions. And again, divergents are supposed to be extremely rare, but there's loads of divergence in the books and the films. Anyway, we're told again and again and again and again that divergents are really dangerous, that they pose a threat to society because they can't be controlled, they can't be boxed in.
You can't tell anyone about this, not even your parents.
But there's so much time spent telling us that divergents are dangerous and not really showing us why. Anyways, they are to be eradicated, killed. If someone finds out that you are divergent, you are killed, executed. And you'd think, because of how dangerous divergents are, that the government might put some extra security measures in or would work super hard to try to find divergents. But no, you think, oh, maybe the aptitude test is public, or maybe there's loads of people in the room to make sure that every divergent is caught, but the test facilitator is just able to fake the results. Again, we're told divergents are really dangerous, and yet nobody's acting like it, but okay. At the sorting ceremony, we meet Janine, who is the head of the erudite faction, played by Kate Winslet.
The future belongs to those who know where they belong.
I trust her. She seems really nice. Triss has a brother named Caleb who is also taking the aptitude test. They're not twins. They're both 16 in the same year. Triss is shocked when her brother Caleb decides to leave their home faction for erudite, the smart faction. I think this plot would have made so much more sense if Caleb had been a year or 2 older than Triss, if he had already left and Triss felt that sense of betrayal, if she saw the impact on her family. That would have made her decision to leave the family feel so much heavier. Caleb also ends up being a backstabbing snake. And again, if he'd been away from home for longer, maybe been brainwashed over a long period of time, his motives would have been clearer. But Veronica Roth did not write it that way. So, and we're not going into this level of detail for each plot point. Don't worry. I just wanted to kind of take some time to set up and show you that the character motives, I find, are unclear across the board, and the world building is half-baked again across the board. The characters are very flat, so much so that when I was reading the books, they all kind of blended together in my head. And it turns out that creating a setting in which everyone has one personality trait does not make for the richest of characters. Who knew? And I don't spend that much time talking about any of the side characters in these stories because they don't really matter. And also, as I said, they're so flat and boring. Also, Veronica Roth loves to throw in a twist where a character has a super secret backstory, or double crosses someone, or the good guy is actually the bad guy, is actually the good guy who's actually the bad guy. And the constant plot twist mixed with the one-dimensional flat characterization makes the plot really muddy and confusing and hard to follow. Triss decides to leave her home faction of Abnegation, the selfless faction, which is characterized by no enjoyment, no pleasure, nothing for yourself, to go to Dauntless, the brave, the adrenaline junkies, the people who have tattoos and wear black. What a crazy choice. The Dauntless are the protectors, Were they police or soldiers? I'm not quite sure what their day-to-day job is, but the Dauntless are protecting everyone in the city walls from something. Nobody knows. Because the Dauntless faction's defining trait is bravery, their initiation / training consists of tests of strength, strategy, and courage. They're thrown into the deep end, climbing up bridges and jumping onto trains and jumping off of trains. Side note, I was thinking, if you're disabled or old, you have no chance in Dauntless. Because how are you supposed to engage in all of these daredevil physical feats? So this was kind of a thought in the back of my head. It's confirmed that Dauntless people kill themselves when they're not physically able anymore. Crazy. Anyways, so the trainees hurl themselves off a train onto the roof of the Dauntless headquarters, where we meet Eric, the leader of Dauntless. He is so obviously evil, and in the film he has these massive eyebrow studs instead of a piercing. The first test of bravery is to jump into this massive pit, and Beatrice is like, all right, I'll do it. I finna be in the pit. And she astounds everyone because she's abnegation.
Yeah, stiff, take it off. Put it back on.
Abnegation, nicknamed Stiff, they're supposed to be shy, selfless, demure. But she jumps, and after the thrill of leaping into the unknown, l'appel du vide, she meets Four, the most beautiful, oldest looking 18-year-old I've ever seen in my life. Look, I know why they cast Theo James, because he's beautiful. But how are we supposed to believe that this man is a fresh adult and is going to fall in love with a 16-year-old? Oh my god, spoiler alert, they fall in love. The beautiful, mysterious, tortured soul is our love interest. Four guides the newbies and is kind of a trainer / teacher as they shed their old factions and become Dauntless. In the ultimate embrace of her new identity, Beatrice changes her name to Triss, and she gets a basic white girl tattoo. Triss starts off way down at the bottom of the ranks, which is bad because only the top make it to Dauntless. The rest are kicked to the streets to be factionless, and as Triss says, it's a fate worse than death. Okay, world building pause, discussion time. The factionless are people who I think have failed training or have abandoned factions or something. Honestly, quite unclear about the factionless, how they came to be, why there's so many of them, and why it's such a bad thing. I don't know if it's just supposed to be the equivalent of being homeless. But Triss is it's a fate worse than death. And old Dauntless people kill themselves rather than become factionless. It's very bizarre and I don't understand it, and it only gets weirder. But on a separate world building note, Four says that this model of only the top people make it through to Dauntless is actually a new rule.
There's no going home to your families, so you live factionless.
Why didn't we know that?
It's a new rule.
And in the book, he makes several allusions to the way things were before and how things were better in the past, implying that Dauntless used to be less hostile or function better. I suspect that Veronica Roth did this to set Four apart from the evil leadership and brand him as one of the good guys. But this is one of many instances in which she muddies the world building in favor of character or plot. And these references to better times also imply that the faction system worked at some point, and it's poor leadership that's led it astray, not that there's something inherently wrong with dividing society according to personality traits. Unlike dystopias like The Hunger Games, where the general population is aware that things are bad, but they're unable to change anything, in Divergent, the majority of people believe that the factions are a good thing. And this kind of emphasizes how Triss is special. She is the chosen one, she is the revolutionary, she can see things that other people can't, and she needs to wake everybody up. But then as the series goes on, the revolution wants to destroy the factions altogether, and they're painted as being bad. And I know it may seem like I'm really harping on a few points, but like I've said, I've watched the films twice and I've read all the books, and I'm still confused about the dystopia of it all and what we're supposed to feel about this society, and it only gets more confusing, which is why I want to talk about it now. so we can have these thoughts going into things. And I want you to all know that I'm truly combing through every detail in order to make sense of this world building. And I think this poorly conceived world really highlights how Roth is using all of these like YA tropes super formulaically without like planning or maybe even understanding their function. With the kind of, are the factions good? Are they bad? Do we like them? Do we hate them? One of the things that the film's marketing really played into was the faction system. On the official Divergent website, there was a quiz to like find out what faction you are, and there is merchandise selling the different like tattoos and the different badges and everything for each faction. So you're kind of encouraged as a reader, as a viewer, to identify with one faction, when in reality, wouldn't it actually be quite meta, quite radical if in the quiz like every result was actually Divergent, because we're all fully fledged human beings? I don't know. Something to think about. Anyway, Triss is really bad at fighting, but she keeps practicing. She gets some pointers from 4. And in the book, there's this like one moment after a week of training that I cannot get over, where Triss is trying to put on a pair of pants, but she can't because of a, quote, bulge of muscle is in the way. I fear that's just not how human bodies work. Also, like, what do you mean a bulge of muscle? It's just such a clunky way of like telling the readers she's strong now. Anyways, she takes the lead in this like capture the flag challenge, and her team wins, and she makes it to the next round. You might be thinking, I thought she was Divergent. When's this going to come into play? And thank you so much for asking. So the second stage of training consists of these like fear simulation tests, where the trainees are injected with a simulation serum and they have to like fight their worst fears. But because Triss is Divergent, the serum doesn't fully work on her, and she is able to clock that she is in a simulation and she can manipulate it, which is similar to what she did in the aptitude test. 4 sees this, he knows exactly what's up, and he warns her, and he's like, you gotta start acting like a Dauntless. But because of this advantage, she starts flying through the ranks, drawing attention from her competitors and painting a big fat target on her back. Her mom organizes a sneaky visit to see her. In the book, it's actually just like a parents visiting day, but in the film, it's this little sneaky subterfuge. And her mom says, you need to go to Erudite and talk to your brother. So Triss sneaks off to Erudite, and Caleb reveals that Erudite is planning to overthrow Abnegation. There's been this whole like conspiracy / smear campaign playing out in the background, where Erudite are spreading rumors that Abnegation are like hoarding resources and that the leaders are corrupt. But there's also apparently a long-standing rivalry between Erudite and Abnegation, which I don't really understand. And the leader of Erudite, Janine, decides to have a little chat with Triss, and that is perfectly normal. There are no evil vibes whatsoever.
You think that human nature is a weakness?
I think human nature is the enemy.
Why this government leader would be so threatened by or like suspicious of this random 16-year-old makes no sense. In between meetings about scientific breakthroughs and political strategy, you're gonna take 15 minutes to talk to a 16-year-old? Sure. She's the main character, so we just like have to accept it. When Triss gets back to Dauntless, she's ambushed by a group of men who attempt to throw her into the deep dark chasm that is in the middle of the Dauntless headquarters, because why would there not be a deep dark chasm in the middle of the Dauntless headquarters? But obviously 4 rescues her and is like, you should probably sleep in my room for safety. Nobody's gonna question this. Nobody is gonna question why this teacher / trainer is letting a student sleep in his bed. Okay, in the book, I'm pretty sure he has like fear God painted on the walls or something. There's a lot of weird like religious / conservative undertones to Abnegation as a whole, but we don't even have time to get into that. We actually don't even have time to get into that. I know I've brought up the 18 to 16-year-old age gap before, but in the book, it's also even weirder because Roth makes nonstop of references to how small, young, and childish Triss looks. And then she consistently describes 4 as looking way older than 18. And this carries on throughout all 3 books. Describing a romance between like a tiny, childish girl and this big, hulking man feels weird, feels inappropriate. And I did not like it. For one of few side character mentions, one of the attackers was Triss's friend Al. He was at risk of failing and becoming a factionless, so out of desperation, he tried to kill Triss, I guess. And then he's like, oh my god, Triss, I'm so sorry. And she's like, I don't forgive you. So he leaps to his death in the chasm. And everyone's sad about it for like 5 seconds, and then they're like, okay, next challenge. Veronica Roth is not afraid to kill a character. She kills many characters, and I will say none of the deaths had emotional impact for me personally, because so many of them were just like, oh, and that person died. Or they'd like introduce a character, and then 10 pages later be like, oh my god, it was so sad, they died actually. The final Dauntless test is a public fear simulation, which threatens to expose Triss as Divergent unless she learns to navigate the fear landscape like a Dauntless. Because again, if people find out that she's Divergent, she'll be killed. Remember that? Divergents get killed. Remember that, because that is important and will come back around later. 4 takes Triss through his fear landscape, and we learn that he's called 4 because he has 4 fears. Heights, tight spaces, killing people, I think, something, and his abusive father. What was that last? Right. Turns out 4's name is actually Tobias. And like Triss, he was raised in abnegation, and his mother died. And his father, Marcus, is the abnegation leader. So let's take a discussion break here again. Okay, abnegation is the faction of the selfless. They're supposed to be inherently selfless and good. So how is there this evil, abusive man there? I don't really understand the factions and the personality traits. Anyways, abuse is referenced throughout the rest of the series, but it's never really like examined or fleshed out at all. And there was one bit where I thought this could be a great opportunity to reflect on how having an abusive father affected Tobias, how this informs his character and his psychology, because he's in Dauntless, he's an excellent fighter, he's very strong, he's super muscular, and this could all bring about a discussion of how he feels he needs to be super strong in order to protect himself so that he can never feel as powerless as he once was. But no. When Roth talks about his training, she writes, I used to run all the time and fight all the time because I cared about muscles. Now my feet have saved me too often, and I can't separate running and fighting from what they are. A way to escape danger, a way to stay alive. And I think that could have been a great avenue to allude to PTSD or childhood trauma or how he's trapped in this survival mode anyways. Point 3. How does Triss not know Tobias when they're in the same faction and they're 2 years apart in age? And their fathers work together. In the first book, she says something like they weren't in school together, but then in the third book, Tobias is reminiscing about how Triss went to his mother's funeral, how he saw her in the school halls and around the faction. See, Veronica Roth loves a twist or a dramatic reveal, but she doesn't think them through. And this is a pattern that we shall see. Our fourth and final point, in the book, much is made of how 4 goes through his fear landscape again and again and again and like still struggles with it. And Triss guides him through it and stands up to Marcus at the end and defends Tobias. And I think that's a pretty pivotal point in their dynamic. It shows her strength and his vulnerability. But in the film, 4 just like breezes on through and is cool, calm, collected, fights Marcus easy peasy. And I feel like this was a case of Hollywood execs being like, no, we need man super strong, woman super weak, girls like that. But it makes the characters just so much less interesting. And not that there was a lot going on in the first place, but a little character development would have been nice. So Triss goes through the final test of the fear landscape. And this time, unlike every other time, at the end, there's a new fear where 4 tries to SA her. And it's weird. And it's kind of just thrown in there and never addressed again. Okay, Triss and all her besties make it through and they're injected with a mysterious serum. Probably nothing. Triss wakes up in the middle of the night to everyone acting like zombies, almost as if they're in a simulation. But Triss is Divergent, so the simulation doesn't affect her. Or this random guy who's like walking around the shop. Did no one tell him about the dangers of being Divergent? They're just gonna leave this man die? Yeah, because he's immediately shot. Remember what I said? Divergents get killed. Remember that. So, turns out, and this might be a shock to everyone, Janine is actually evil. Crazy. And she teamed up with Eric, who's also evil. Double whammy, double homicide. And they're not just going to overthrow the abnegation faction, but they're actually going to eradicate them. They turned Dauntless into mindless soldiers that round up and kill all the abnegation. A genocide? Okay, very brief discussion break. I'm going to put you guys into breakout rooms. Think about some 3 questions. Okay. 1, why are they killing abnegation? 2, what is going to happen when the Dauntless wake up and realize that they've had their consciousness hijacked? 3, what are the other factions going to think when they realize that 1/5 of the population has been murdered? I actually have no answers. It's an instance that makes Roth's poor storytelling really clear. She sets up these intense conflicts, but there's no real motivations behind the characters that we can understand. There's no explanation of what's at stake, what led to this, or what this means for the world, the impact it will have. For example, on the other hand, some good storytelling. In The Hunger Games, the protagonist Katniss rebels against those in power, and as a punishment to her, as a warning to other rebels, her home district is attacked. We know why this happens, we understand the power dynamics, and we see the fallout. But in Divergent, the attack on Triss's home faction just feels like it's for the plot. It just feels like, so there's something at stake, there is a conflict. It's something to spur the protagonist into action, but that's it. And even with the breadcrumbs of this smear campaign and the tensions between factions, this conflict does not feel earned. Triss discovers that 4 is also Divergent because he's also awake, but then they're running around trying to save her family and they immediately get caught. 4 is brought to Janine and Triss is ordered to be executed, but her mom swoops in and saves her. And we discover that her mom actually grew up in Dauntless. Kind of. Put a pin in that for now. We have exactly 2 seconds to process this information before she is shot dead in the streets. And in the process, Triss has to kill her friend Will in self-defense. Then Triss goes and finds her dad and her brother, and they sneak their way into Dauntless, and Triss's dad is shot dead. This happens in the span of 10 minutes, maybe 20 pages. Both parents dead. Dead parent YA trope, take a shot. The second death also just really undercuts the first, and no offense to them, but I just really did not care. We barely spent any time with them. It didn't seem like Triss had much of an attachment to them. She left her home faction and never really thought about it after. So there's no weight behind their deaths. It's just deaths for death's sake. I don't know. For death's sake. 4 has been taken to Janine and is now under mind control, which I don't really understand because he was immune to the first serum. But now he's not immune to the second? I don't know. But Triss pulls the classic 4, I know you're in there, and manages to wake him up out of it. And they both force Janine to shut down the simulation. They get on a train and they escape. In the book, Roth really leans into the romance here because despite, witnessing both her parents murdered, despite killing someone herself, she's making out with 4 on the train. Nothing to get your motor going, a bit of death and trauma. So that's Divergent. That is the first book. I hope everyone's still with me, still thinking about our world building discussion questions, because guess what? We're only gonna have more. I had to take a break to chug some water because I feel like my voice is going. Okay, now, Insurgent. This is where the film starts to diverge from the source material quite a bit. No pun intended. The girlies are on the run, on the lam. They decide to take refuge in Amity, which is the peace faction, and they're all farmers. Looks pretty slay, honestly. I took the Divergent quiz, and I found out that if I were in a faction, I would be in Amity. So when I was saying the things about, what is going to happen after everyone wakes up, or, what are the other factions going to think, Janine is way ahead of me. She is oh, there are a few rogue Divergents that have actually caused all of this conflict, and that's why this has happened. And because of that, Triss, 4, and all of their co-conspirators are wanted. The real reason that Janine led an attack on abnegation is different in the book and in the film. In the book, the abnegation faction had information, and they were going to reveal the secret information that pertains to the outside world to the masses, and Janine wanted to suppress that information. In the film, there is a magic box containing a message from the city founders that can only be opened by Divergence, and it was hidden, I think, in the Prior's house. The evil baddies come to Amity seeking the Divergence, and their buddies run, and they find the factionless. You know, the people who I guess are kind of equivalent of homeless? ? Unclear. But it turns out the factionists have this like massive underground bunker and network. Their leader, Four's dead mother, Evelyn. Turns out she faked her death to get away from Marcus, the abusive husband/father, and actually went underground in the factionists and is now their leader. As I said before, Veronica Roth loves a twist. Also, we're supposed to believe that Miss Evelyn is Theo James's mother when they look like maybe 10 years apart in age. Sure. Evelyn proposes an alliance between the Dauntless and the factionless, but Four is not having it. So they end up going to Kandor, which is the Truth faction, which is led by Daniel Day Kim. Jin, I love him. In Kandor, they have this like public trial where they're injected with a truth serum and they confess their crimes, I guess. In the book, Triss is able to overpower the truth serum. She still like confesses to everything, but she does it out of her own free will. And this will come up later on, but because she's Divergent, she's basically immune to all the serums that they have. She confesses in front of everyone that she killed Will, and her friends are upset. But then they get over it, obviously. And Will is described by Roth several times as having green eyes like celery. Celery green eyes. If you want more tasters of bad writing, I jotted down some notes that stuck out to me. I feel like now is maybe a good time to talk about the poor quality of writing. Triss always describes Four as he smells like wind. He smells like wind. How can someone smell like wind? I know, like, rain has a smell, petrichor, but wind doesn't smell like anything. Wind carries scents, actually. In the first book, she admires the smooth way he walks, feet barely lifting off the ground. Some other choice phrases. Her words sound bigger, like they expanded in her mouth before she spoke them. Okay? We move closer together like sections of a tightened shoelace. Right? It's like the landscape is an interrupted sentence, one side dangling in the air, unfinished, and the other, a completely different subject. Right. The quality of writing is not there. Sorry. Evil Eric from Dauntless leads an attack on Kandor to find Divergence. And in the book, they shoot everyone with simulation serums, and the people who are awake are obviously the Divergence. But in the film, they have these Divergent detector machines. Where has this been the whole time? Why isn't everyone screened with this Divergent detector machine? How convenient. Blah, blah, blah. Plot convenience. Blah, blah, blah. Eric is killing any Divergents because, remember, Divergents get killed. But the gang overpower and execute him. In the film, Janine is putting any captured Divergents through simulations to open the box. And honestly, I actually found the film change much more interesting than the book, because in the book was so boring and repetitive, and just because it's about the suppression of information, it's just all these diplomatic talks between the leaders and the main characters talking to the leader of Kandor or Amity or whoever and trying to convince them to do the right thing. It's just a lot of talking and conversations and not a lot of plot. They leave Kandor and there are these simulation agents that are remotely activated, and 3 people who try to jump to their death. They manage to save 2 of them, but sadly, Suki Waterhouse dies. Celebrity cameo, Suki Waterhouse. It's very Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, where Voldemort is Harry Potter must turn himself over, or more shall die. Kind of like that. And because Triss is such a selfless main character, she surrenders herself to Janine. Again, I appreciate the addition of the magic box, because in the book, Janine runs simulations on Triss, but I actually can't remember why, or it was just very unclear. Anyways, Triss learns that her snake brother Caleb also betrayed her to Erudite, and again, this twist had no real weight because it's not like they were super close. We didn't really spend much time with Caleb, and we don't really know if Triss cares about him at all. 4 is captured when he tries to break in to save Triss, but Peter comes to the rescue because he's double-crossed and switched sides so many times, and he will continue to double-cross and switch sides to the point where it's never a shock, because it's just like, of course, he's just out for self-interest. Anyways, he helps 4 free Triss. In the book, we have all these like diplomatic talks where they're trying to wrangle factions into uniting against Erudite and like uniting in this resistance movement, and they plan to infiltrate Erudite headquarters and confront Janine. And then one of the characters, Tori, who is a tattoo artist and who ran the aptitude test on Triss at the beginning, I breezed over that earlier, but she ends up killing Janine because her Divergent brother was killed. And this is actually of so little importance, I'm just going to spoil it now, that he actually was not killed. He was rescued by the outside people, but that's a plot twist that genuinely does not even matter. In the book, they like have the hard drive that has a video revealing this secret information, but in the film, Triss is like, actually I'm going to sneak back into the lab because I think that secret box is really important, and I'm going to unlock it with my Divergent powers through these simulations to figure out what the secret message is. So, what's the secret message? I hear you all yelling at your screen. Thank you so much for asking. So this is the start of the kind of bizarre world building nonsense that I was alluding to at the start, and I'm really going to need you to just stay strong and stay with me. And this revelation kind of leads us into Allegiant, so I'm going to blend together some world building information for clarity purposes. The walled off city of Chicago is a social experiment designed by humans beyond the wall, and they segregated people into factions based on genetics, but the Divergents are the true purpose of the experiment. They are the desired outcome because, and here is the Allegiant bit, humans started doing a bunch of genetic engineering to weed out bad traits, but it backfired and what they called a purity war broke out.
My jeans are blue.
So all of the people in the city of Chicago are genetically damaged, but the Divergents are genetically pure and proof that humanity could like recover. And the experiment was orchestrated by the Bureau of Genetic Welfare, who are waiting beyond the wall. So it's at this point that it starts to become clear that this is a eugenics plot. Anyways, the person delivering the message, her name, Edith Pryor. And Triss is like, wait, my last name is Pryor. Triss's ancestor. As if she wasn't already like the special chosen one enough, she has to be like the ancestor of the like original person in the chosen one narrative. I'm not charmed by it. And Veronica Roth really does so much to ensure that she is the chosen one of the story. And there we have Insurgent. Next we have Allegiant. And it is widely accepted that Allegiant is bad, even by fans of the Divergent series who were particularly unhappy with the ending of Allegiant. So, we're going to breeze through the plot and just pick out the most important parts because it was really boring and repetitive and confusing, much like Insurgent. Allegiant shakes things up a little, and it's no longer from Triss's first-person perspective. It's actually from a dual perspective of Triss and 4. Interesting, right? Okay, and how does Roth distinguish the two characters? You know, how does she make those voices distinct? How do we know who is narrating at any point? We actually don't. There's no distinction between the two voices. Like, it's just Triss and not Triss, but it's the exact same narration style. It made me feel like the dual perspective was just kind of pointless. The conflict of Allegiant is split into inside the city and outside the city of Chicago. In the city, stay with me, okay? Stay with me. In the city, the factionless want to abandon the factions altogether and remake society from scratch. But the leader, Evelyn, just seems kind of evil and power hungry. And it's kind of a problem because the factionless now have all the weapons, which is a bit dangerous. Evelyn is kind of giving like the Hunger Games President Coin is a half-baked twin. The power-hungry new leader that we thought would be a good replacement, but is actually just as bad as the original one. But obviously, she's not nearly as interesting or compelling as a character. That just goes without saying for like every character in this series. So some people want to reinstate the factions because they were like, wait, things were working before. We had peace. We had harmony. What was rad about that? And they are called Allegiant. This adds to the confusion that I was talking about before of like, are we supposed to think that the factions are good or bad? How are we supposed to feel about them? How do the characters feel? Because the characters are very much just like, guys, stop fighting. We shouldn't have conflict. Like, stop. They're just trying to like diffuse the tension, but they're not really picking a side. So it's quite confusing. The factionists are also having like trials for the traitors, and Triss's brother Caleb is one of the traitors. And at this point in the film, they're making some weird cinematography choices. Anyways, people are also divided as to whether they should go outside the wall or stay in. Evelyn and the factionists are like, don't you fucking dare go outside. And Triss and Four and the gang are like, we're gonna go. So Triss, Four and the gang break Caleb out of prison and they're like, let's get out of here. Let's go, girls. And it's once they've kind of made their big escape plan and go outside the wall that we really start to see the budget cuts for the Allegiant film. The CGI in this film is god awful. And they also just, for some reason in the film, have added so much futuristic technology that was not present in the book. And obviously all of that technology requires special effects, which requires a budget, which I do not think they had. In the book, they just walk through like the outside land till they find people. But in the film, the outside looks like the surface of Mars and it is raining blood red rain. And at one point, Caleb says,
"This hole looks radioactive. Or at least it was in the last 200 years.
You cannot see radioactivity. That is the point. Nuclear radiation is so dangerous because you cannot see it. Also, just like making this world look like Mars adds nothing to the film. It just looks stupid. No offense. They're picked up by the outsiders who are in these like invisible hovercrafts, and they float alongside them in orange bubbles that look ridiculous. They reach the Bureau of Genetic Welfare, which is located in the O'Hare Airport of Chicago. They have to strip off their clothing. And at this point, when Triss takes off a vest, like a denim vest, and has no bra underneath, that's when I'm like, this was made by a man. Anyways, they have a disinfecting shower of goo. Then we get a little history lesson from the Bureau of Genetic Welfare, and it's when we learn of the Purity War. And so we learn divergents are the purpose of the experiment. And Triss is the first like true success of the experiment. She's the first genetically pure person to come out of this experiment. Okay, and the Bureau has been watching over this experiment, kind of Truman Show style-esque. And at this point, remember when I was saying to you, divergents get killed. And we've seen a lot of divergents get killed, not just the ones that I've mentioned, but if divergents are the purpose of the experiment, why was the Bureau letting so many divergents get killed? Why were they sacrificing so many, like, potential successes of the experiment? I don't really know. Anyways, Bill Skarsgård takes Triss to meet the leader of the Bureau, David, who gives us another little surprise reveal. There's a lot of exposition going on here at the moment, but we learn that Triss's mother was not Abnegation. She was not Dauntless. She was actually from the Fringe. I am confused as to what the Fringe is, why it exists. Kind of similar to like the Factionless. I don't really know how it came to be. It seems to just consist of these kind of like shanty towns that are frequently raided, but who the raiders are, again, I don't know. And there's a whole subplot here where Tobias goes out on these like missions to the Fringe, and he discovers that the Bureau is rescuing children, but are actually kidnapping them and separating them from their families, and then they take them back to the Bureau and wipe their memory. It feels like it's supposed to be kind of an allusion to like Canada and Australia and their history of stealing Indigenous children from their families to assimilate. But again, like so many YA dystopias, there's no real engagement with this politics. Feels very much like, how do we tell this story but make white people the oppressed ones? And there's no discussion of the like morals or the purpose or the any explanation for this. It's just like, that's bad. Guys, you should stop. And Tobias is like, I actually think the Bureau is evil. It just doesn't really fit with the plot much. It doesn't flesh anything out. Like, we already kind of felt like the Bureau was evil. I don't really think this was necessary. And it's just made more confusing because Triss's mom, Natalie, came from the Fringe, but she didn't have her memory wiped. And the mom twist, again, is so typical of Roth's style, where it's like retroactively rewriting a character's backstory for the sake of a poorly conceived plot twist that just makes things more confusing. And there's so many more of these plot twists that I've just glossed over. But another one to mention is that at the start of Allegiant, so that's the start of the third book, Tobias, who's been a main character the entire time, is like reminiscing over his Dauntless mentor, Amar, who died. And after the first mention of Amar's name, 20 pages later, it's revealed that he is actually not dead and he was rescued by the Bureau. This might have had weight if Amar was like mentioned in the first or second book and Tobias talked about like the impact he had on him or something, but it's just such a blatant, transparent attempt to like shock the reader and say, plot twist, they're not actually dead. Like, we get it. Also, Amar is gay, but it's very odd the way they talk about this in the book because there are two characters who are gay, but gay is never explicitly said. It's very just like very heavily hinted at. But when Amar is talking about it, he's like, being gay is really taboo because the Bureau is obsessed with procreation, with passing on genes. And he says, George and I are both GPs, genetically pures. So any entanglement that can't produce a stronger genetic code, it's not encouraged. That's all. So in this society, homosexuality isn't viewed as wrong for all of the reasons that it is in like modern culture of like, I don't know, religion, bigotry, etc., etc. But like in any kind of fascist dystopian state, any existing prejudices are only going to be further exasperated, whether that's against people of color or poor people or gay people or whatever. And then I just find it very odd in YA dystopias when those kind of prejudices are still present, but there's again no connection with like real politics or real history, and it's just like, so you're jumping through hoops to make sure that being gay is still looked down upon, but it doesn't have any engagement with like actual like society or culture. And the other trope that I have alluded to that I hate is the chosen one narrative, which I just find so boring. And Triss, as we know, is the only genetically pure person in the experiment. To continue this kind of like, how do we tell this as a tale of segregation and oppression without actually talking about segregation or oppression? In the outside world, there's this whole hierarchy of like genetically damaged and genetically pure people. Like genetically damaged people aren't able to go over like a certain level in the building. Like it's literally segregation, but it's under a eugenics thinking. Anyway, Triss is genetically pure. Let's just go through how Veronica Roth bends over backwards to make sure that we know that she is the chosen one. One, I breezed over this, but her dad was actually an erudite growing up and was friends with Janine, and then he became a leader of abnegation. Her mom was not abnegation, not Dauntless, but actually from the Fringe, and was the one person who volunteered to go into the experiment to like help the Divergents. 3, the message from the ancestors that was hidden away was from Edith Pryor, Triss's ancestor. Okay, not only that, then 4, our other main character is also special, chosen one. His dad was the abnegation leader and is now championing the Allegiant cause. His mom faked her death and is now leader of the factionless cause. Every main player in the plot is like the protagonist or their parent, which I think is just such lazy storytelling. It's just so crazy that Veronica Roth decided to go down a eugenics route because she said herself that like she'd set up world building in the first 2 books but didn't really know where they were gonna go, and then decided to go with this genetic storytelling. So while Triss and David are getting buddy and she's like, oh my god, I'm genetically pure, that's cool. For meanwhile, is insecure about being genetically damaged, and he joins a rebellion that is brewing in the Bureau. He's also observing the conflict playing out in Chicago and wants to step in. And then through a series of events that I'm going to breeze over because it's not interesting and it's too convoluted, they learn that the Bureau is planning to release a memory serum across all of Chicago in order to kind of like reset the experiment and to bring back the faction system. And there's a bunch of conflict between Triss and Four that's so repetitive and pointless. And they keep going back and forth and like not trusting each other, not believing each other. But eventually they do. And the gang come together to plan to save the city. In the film, they foil the plan to release the serum by fighting their way to Erudite headquarters. And the film ends with Triss and Tobias looking out over the city, jump scare hologram David in the background. But this was not the end of the story. There was a planned fourth film called Ascendant that never came to fruition, partly because of how poorly the book's ending was received. So in the book, what happens is Tobias goes into the city to try to broker peace among the factionless and the Allegiant and like prevent an all-out war. And then back in the Bureau, Triss is like, wait, I don't really like this genetically pure, genetically damaged mindset. And I don't really like how much you guys in the Bureau kind of stick into it. What if we use the memory serum in the Bureau to wipe everyone's memory and reteach them that genetically pure and genetically damaged are actually equal? The only problem with this is that the memory serum is behind a series of security protocols, one of them being the death serum, right? And Caleb initially volunteers as like a penance for being a snake the entire time. But at the last minute, Triss takes his place and is like, I'm actually really selfless and I'm going to do this. This is my calling. But because she's genetically pure, everyone's like, wait, maybe the death serum won't work on her because she's immune to all the serums, right? And they're right. The death serum does not kill her. But David does. He comes along and shoots her, and she manages to release the memory serum, but then she dies. The girls were not happy with this, and there was a petition that got 27,000 signatures for an alternate ending in the film. The ending in the book includes this epilogue of like everyone rebuilding Chicago, and Tobias is mourning Triss. But fans were unhappy with what they felt was just an ending with a character death for shock value. And it was only when writing this that a glaringly obvious world-building plot hole came clear to me. If the genetically pure like Triss are immune to all the serums, how could the memory serum work on the Bureau, which is full of genetically pure people? Anyways, I hated Allegiant, not for the ending, for the whole thing. And that goes for the book and the film. But the book was genuinely painful to read. It was so boring and so repetitive, and it was making me bang my head into the wall with frustration. But I tried my best to summarize the key points and the world building as concisely and as clearly as possible. But if there is any confusion, just know that that is mutual because I am also still confused. It was a bad book. And it was a terrible film, and Shailene Woodley said that she almost quit acting after Allegiant. And the box office numbers reflected this, because it flopped majorly. Lionsgate originally planned to release Ascendant as a theatrical film, and then when they saw the box office numbers, they were like, ooh, maybe we'll just do a straight-to-TV film. And they planned to do a spin-off TV series after that with, like, expanding the world of Divergent and the characters, but nobody, including the cast and crew, were really interested in an Ascendant film. And I don't think we missed much on that one. Another major factor in this, I think, was that by the time Allegiant came out, it was 2016, and the YA dystopia craze was already kind of rolling to a close. The last Hunger Games film, Mockingjay Part 2, came out in 2015, and like the end of the kind of Twilight franchise / supernatural romance, it seemed like audiences were fatigued or had maybe aged out of this trend. But Allegiant is not the last that we heard from the Divergent team, because in 2018, they tweeted that there was going to be a Divergent, like, episodes, choose your own story, mobile game. But it turns out that it was just, like one story of a What's Your Story game. And shout out to the YouTube channel Simply Geek for having the only footage I could possibly find of this mobile game, because the artwork was very much giving, like, the Kim K mobile game.
Get your fucking ass up and work.
But then it was just an episode story. It's funny because the post for the game are all filled with comments and replies like, we don't want this. Give us Ascendant. People are still waiting for it. But if you're craving more Allegiant, if that's even possible, there is actually a VR game available on Steam, which is a 10-minute immersive story. It's described as the Allegiant VR experience was created as an experiment in VR storytelling. Interactivity is present, but limited.
Clock is ticking. What's your name again?
That's the rookie.
Hand me the device you want us to use.
Free to play, by the way. Yeah, so that's the Divergent franchise. I really do want to stress the amount of time that I've spent thinking about this world building and how it does not make sense. And I had to restrain myself from being like, and on page 237 of Allegiant, there's an allusion to this one history, which actually, when you put it in the grand timeline, does not make sense, because I was getting a little bit too caught up in it. And I fear this was the deepest that I could dive without drowning. Wait. I just came up with that. That was not in the script. The script is done. And if anyone ever tries to accuse me of using AI ChatGPT, I want you to look at this. When I was writing out the script, I really felt like I was doing my Leaving Cert English exam again, where I was like writing for 2.5 hours straight, and I was like, my hand is cramping, and I'm so tired. Yeah, that's Divergent. I have a couple other YA dystopia video ideas brewing, and just video ideas in general. I did take a prolonged break. Some of it was intentional, some of it was unintentional. I only recently got diagnosed with PCOS, and that has been making my life a living hell, so thank God we have a diagnosis. But also after the Palestine video, I needed to take a little break to prevent a mentee bee. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this Divergent deep dive, literary analysis, critical discussion, film postmortem, franchise dissection. And I will see you in my next video. Bye! Thank you to all my patrons, and a special shout out to Kelly T, Paula Boone, Cecilia D'Arvel, and Eric Danielson, as well as my Sharpay Evans tier patrons.